So Kissing the Pope's Ring. What an odd title for a sermon, right? Well, my contract says that I get study leave, and I usually take it in the month of July. And the purpose of study leave is to do a lot of reading and research to inform my sermons, mostly in the fall, but sometimes maybe it makes it all the way into the winter months. Well, this year on my list was binge watching the 2012 Showtime series, The Borgias. Has anybody seen it here at all? Okay, one person. So it's actually on Netflix now. I didn't have Showtime, so you can still watch it. Maybe you will, or maybe you won't after you hear about it. So it's historically based on Rodrigo Borgia, a Spanish cardinal from a noble family who became Pope Alexander VI from 1493 to 1503, just 10 years, but prominent years. And the role was played brilliantly by Jeremy Irons. Now, Borgia had been a cardinal for quite some time. In fact, he had risen because of his connections to the other popes to the vice chancellor, which is the second highest position in the Vatican. And he'd been that position for 30 years, over 4 popes. And so by the time he was supposed to be considered pope, he was by far the wealthiest cardinal out there. And of course, he used that wealth to bribe all the other cardinals so that he could be elected pope. So this series went on for 3 years, and it was 10 episodes for each year. And it was just fascinating. It's just one thing after another of massive corruption, deceit, and by the end, extreme violence. And I would sit there and watch these shows, and I'd say, that can't possibly have happened. They must have made that for Hollywood or something. So I'd Google it, of course, and sure enough, it happened. I mean, it was just unbelievable what had happened during that short 10 years. Now, I said it was 1493 to 1503. What is really important about that, other than it's sort of the height of the Renaissance? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? So this pope is known primarily for 2 things. In 1493, he delivered the papal bull that said that the Pope asserts rights to colonize, convert, and enslave the non-Christian native peoples. That was for Portugal and Spain. He was a Spaniard, so he had a connection there. But then that became the doctrine of discovery that was also used by England, Australia, and the United States, even into the 20th century, as a legal precedent for genocide and the taking land from native peoples. So he was a very important pope, even if he didn't last that long. The other one was that he used his position to form advantageous strategic alliances and strengthen the military power of the Vatican, for which he's got a lot of admiration. Now, from a 21st century lens, having a pope being a king or an emperor, he basically unified Italy at the time and had an alliance with the king of France. I don't see that as really a thing a pope should be doing, but back then he was treated as a king and it made a lot of sense. Now, another interesting factoid was that the person who really made this strategic alliance happen was his firstborn son. Yes, he was a pope. He had 3 or 4 mistresses and 4 to 6 children that he acknowledged. It's a remarkable story. Anyway, this son, Cesare was this ruthless political mastermind, and he was actually friends with Machiavelli. And so he was the person that Machiavelli wrote about when he wrote The Prince, in which he wrote that immoral means are often justified to achieve glory and survival. So this is quite intertwined. All right, so kissing the Pope's ring. What about that? As I'm watching this, there was one thing that was continuous from episode to episode to episode. At some point in each show, some visitor, some dignitary, some suitor for his daughter would show up in the College of Cardinals and go up this elaborate carpet, and there would be the Pope dressed out in all this regalia with his mistress right next to him, by the way. And he had white gloves and this papal ring, and people would have to kiss it. And he used it to leverage against his enemies, because if they didn't come to Rome and kiss the ring, they'd launch a war against him, kind of thing. And I sat there and thought about this. There was this extreme piety and symbol of loyalty to the Pope and the Holy Roman Church, but yet it was over the top of this pit or cauldron of corruption and deceit. It was just pathetic. So I just found that just one fascinating irony of the whole thing. Well, let's get back to the point. I was supposed to be watching this so it would inform my sermons. So it started me thinking, well, what symbols do Unitarian Universalists have? What would be our equivalent of a Pope's ring? Obviously, I couldn't think of one. Religiously, we're direct descendants of the Protestant Reformation, right? And the reformers were so repulsed by the corruption and the opulence of the church in Rome that they pretty much went overboard in their quest for simplicity and austerity. And in the scheme of things with the Reformation, we were over way on that side, the most liberal side, but also the one that kind of took away everything. You just had white walls. So they often removed as many symbols and rituals as possible because they felt it distracted from the word. Because it was all about the word from the Christian Bible as discerned by the minister, and they wanted everything to focus on that. Some of them didn't even have stained glass windows, for example. So, because of that, we don't use a lot of rituals and we don't use a lot of symbols. So I started thinking about it. Well, let's see, there's flower communion Sunday in the spring, and there's the mingling of the waters or water communion or whatever you call it in the fall, which is probably you're going to have it next month, or maybe you won't because of the pandemic. Okay, that happens once a year. That's not really that big a deal. And then it was right in front of me, the flaming chalice. And I thought, well, that's probably the most universal symbol among Unitarian Universalist congregations. And I think you've had a sermon or two up here about it, but if you haven't recently or you're new, I'll give you a brief history of where that comes about. So it didn't start out as this beautiful piece of art that you're seeing in front of you. It started out as a two-dimensional symbol on paper or on wood or something like that. So the symbol has its origins in a logo designed by Austrian refugee Hans Dietrich. So Hans Deutsch, excuse me. He was living in Paris during the 1930s, and Deutsch drew critical cartoons of the Nazis and of Adolf Hitler. Well, when the Nazis invaded Paris in 1940, he had to run. So he ran first to the south of France, then to Spain, and finally he got an altered passport and got into Portugal. And there he met the Reverend Charles Joy, who was the executive director of the Unitarian Service Committee. Now, the Service Committee was new. It was founded in Boston to assist Eastern Europeans, particularly Unitarians and Jews who needed to escape Nazi persecution. And from this Lisbon headquarters, Joy oversaw a secret network of couriers and agents. Okay, he wasn't the only one running a network of secret couriers and agents at the time, but all the other organizations were quite well established. And so they could put their symbol on stationery or on cards, or with refugees, they could suddenly put it on a lamppost or on a rock on a sidewalk so people would know how to find their way. They'd know where there was a safe zone. Well, the Unitarians, this was a last minute decision to set sail for Europe and try to help when Czechoslovakia was taken over. And so they didn't have a symbol. So the idea was to create a symbol that Unitarians could use. And so they went to Deutsch, and he had this inspiration from the chalices of oil burned in ancient Greek and Roman altars. So when I first came to Unitarian Universalism, I assumed this was some ritual thing that went on for 2,000 years. Come to find out, it's as recent as 1940. But the inspiration came from the Greeks and the Romans. And then it became this underground symbol in occupied Europe throughout World War II. And then after the war, it was adopted by many congregations, first as a symbol, and then later in the 60s, it started being lit for services and then small groups, just to make something a little more sacred with a reading to say, hey, we're going to do something special about this time. So that's the short history of our flaming chalice. But it has a number of meanings that if you listen to the words that are read, often it's pointing to one meaning or another. And there's essentially three that I was going to share with you right now. The first one, and probably the one that is often used, is the light of truth. We're a very heady folk. We're on this intellectual journey to find what's true for us. And so often, holding that light of truth up in the air is sort of a symbol of, okay, I see that in all this darkness of the world. Now, related to that, and this one I like a little bit better, it's a beacon of light in our search for meaning, as if the torch is up there lighting our path as we're out there searching. But the one that I like the most, that I think is the most true to its original purpose, is to help people. It's all about people. It's about a community of people. And I think the flame represents the warmth of community. And so some of you that have joined my book and movie discussions on Zoom over the last year know that I use a special chalice when I'm online. Well, I brought a bigger version of that today to share with you. So this, if I had my way, would be a chalice. So if you can see it, it's this artist rendition of primitive people arm in arm surrounding a candle, which is a flame. So I am going to light that. And I should probably hold it up so the viewers at home could see it. I hope it lights. There we go. So there you go. So the camera, I hope you can see that. I'll put it up front. So I like this one. It just, to me, speaks to that warmth of community. So I believe that this is a good representation of the spirit of love referenced by the story of the founding of the Dedham Church. I believe the chalice is a physical manifestation of the symbolism of our covenant that dates back to 1637. I believe lighting the chalice each Sunday morning should remind us of our covenant with one another. In fact, I think it should be a point at which every Sunday morning we re-covenant with one another. And if those of you that were joining my Zoom services for the last year, the opening word, the chalice lighting words, admittedly were a bit of a mouthful and a bit awkward. The purpose of that, I took the covenant that the Open Circle Fellowship had written, condensed it down to more poetic language, and said, okay, we're going to learn about covenant. And I didn't expect it to go for 2 years. But so every Sunday morning, we recommitted our covenant with each other. That was the purpose of that one. So think about the opening words that I shared with you this morning. Love is our greatest purpose by J. Abernathy. Split it apart. It talks about in the beginning how we should be together. It says, we affirm that love is our greatest purpose. Accepting one another is the truest form of faithful living. Then it goes on to say, what are then we doing together? Well, it's the search for truth. It's our constant star. So that's that bright image that we're all seeking, right? And then it says, we pledge our hearts, minds, and hands to challenge injustice with courage and to find hope in times of fear. But then it closes again, reinforcing how we should do this together by saying, to live out our Unitarian Universalist values every day as a beloved community. Thus, we do covenant with each other and with all that is sacred in life. It's my favorite chalice lighting words. So the lighting of our chalice is a communal act of reaffirming our covenant, just like it was back in the Dedham Covenant in 1637. And basically, to restate that one, it said we covenant to live together in love, to search together in love, and then the last part that wasn't really referenced in the reading, to hang in there and resolve our differences because of love. So one thing, I want to step away from what I was just talking about for a second. People often come into this faith and they're filled with what it's not. Because they'll come from congregations or maybe nothing where they just felt that it didn't meet their needs, or sometimes they felt abused by whatever religion they came from. And so they come here and say, well, I like that it's free and open and expansive and it doesn't have a rigid doctrine. And of course, I think over time, we all learned that this is far more than what it isn't, right? And so it should be talked about as an expansive search for meaning. And I love the words that you state every Sunday morning, because that's exactly what it says. It says, we gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. So it's really clear what you're about. You're on a search together, and you're going to think deep thoughts, right? But I would argue it's missing a part. That you should also uplift the dominant spirit of love, with which the original Dedham covenant was carefully created. Our covenants in all of our congregations are not just about what we stand for, but how we go about it. So, lighting the chalice should above all remind us of the warmth of community in my mind. But I'll actually give you a fourth interpretation of the light of the chalice that I was saving for the last part. It should be a shining light on the community with the best and healthiest behavior possible. If the only thing that holds us together is a covenant of love, we should be better at this than anybody else, and then let the light show it, right? So I opened the sermon telling you about the ritual of kissing the Pope's ring and what a farce it made of Christianity at the time. And of course, I picked the most abhorrent example possible of behavior. But by contrast, our flaming chalice should also be a beacon to the world of a better way of being. It should remind us that we are a covenantal community held together by nothing more than a promise to be together in love. May it be thus, now and forevermore. Amen.